Hey guys, hope you're doing well. So today we'll be going into a more controversial topic of history, namely whether there was human sacrifice of a particular demographic in ancient Israel. Undoubtedly something that will elicit a lot of emotional resistance and cognitive dissonance. But as you know, the intention of my channel is to not necessarily delve into controversy, but to look at history in a real way and allow that to reinterpret and reform our understanding of religion, religious ideas, and the way that religion evolves over time. Okay, so we'll begin with first looking at the general sense of how human sacrifice is presented in the Old Testament in a particular strand. Because what we'll see is that there are definitely verses that decry human sacrifice as abhorrent, detestable, something that is forbidden by God. But then we'll also find that there are certain vestige verses. These are like relics that have survived redactions and alterations and erasing of content from scribes and whatnot that indicate there is an older layer to this, okay, to the theology in the religion of Israel that indicates this practice, that is human sacrifice, was once permitted and even ordained by Yahweh. Okay? But first, we'll begin with the beginning. We'll look at these verses that indicate that this is forbidden, and then we'll sort of develop this further. So here's one example, Leviticus 18, verse 21, quote, "Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Moloch, for you must not profane the name of your God. I am Yahweh, I am the Lord." Now, Moloch, identified here as some sort of deity, is how commonly interpreted, usually described or understood as some kind of Canaanite or Assyrian god that sort of focused or was notorious for sacrifice of neonates. But what has been argued, although with much controversy, is that this is actually a misinterpretation. Moloch is not a deity, but rather Moloch is Molch. Uh, Molch, or um, basically a technical term for a type of sacrifice that was then reinterpreted to refer to a particular deity. Okay, and now the reason why this was done, arguably, as we will see as this video progresses, is to sort of distance this practice from the God of Israel, from Yahweh. Okay, but Molch, in this hypothesis or this theory, is understood as a technical term for a sacrifice whereby the victim passes through fire. Now, what that means is not really clear. Does that mean there's like torches of fire that a victim has to walk through and then is sacrificed? Does it mean that the victim is executed and then offered as a burnt offering? It's not really understood, but we know for sure that there's an element of fire connected to this. Okay? So this aspect of it will be developed further, but right now I'm just indicating that Moloch, some debate about what this is, who that is, but nonetheless, in this verse, obviously, it's prohibited. Okay, God forbids this kind of ritual. Furthermore, in 2 Kings 16:3, quote, "He followed," he referring to Ahaz. This was considered one of the evil kings of Israel. Ahaz followed the ways of the kings of Israel and even sacrificed his son in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. Okay, so Ahaz was an Israelite king, but here the verse is saying that, yes, he sacrificed his son, but This was by no means a practice of Israel. This is something that this king appropriated from foreign nations. Okay, so yes, he committed this evil crime, but this is something he got. He was influenced by some kind of outside influence. And then Jeremiah 19:5, quote, "They, that is the Israelites, have built the high places of Baal to burn their children in the fire as offerings to Baal. Something I, Yahweh, did not command or mention, nor did it enter my mind." Okay, so again, um, this is something that occurred, but they weren't, Israelites weren't doing this to me, Yahweh, rather, they were doing this to this foreign god, Baal. So what we're seeing is that human sacrifice was attested, it was recognized that this was occurring, but this was portrayed as a detestable practice that was, either offered to this god Moloch, to the god Baal, or it was done by evil Israelites who were basically appropriating foreign practices. Okay, that is the general understanding most people have when they read the Old Testament. But now let's look a little bit further and see if we can unveil some of these layers that indicate that maybe there's a more disturbing reality, that this was not a foreign practice, but rather something that was actually innate to Israel. So, first thing we'll look at is 2 Kings, chapter 3, verses 26 through 27. Quote, "When the king of Moab saw that the battle had gone against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through to the king of Edom, but they failed. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, and offered him as a sacrifice on the city wall. The fury against Israel was great. They withdrew and returned to their own land." Now, what's interesting here is that this depicts a war, a battle between Moab and Israel. The king of Moab was about to lose. He was surrounded. They were fighting, but they were losing. And as a last-ditch effort, he sacrificed his own adolescent, the heir to his throne. And the consequence of this was that his God, the God of Moab, responded to the sacrifice to such an extent that the Israelites were pushed back and they had to flee. Now, what's interesting about this passage is that the author does not feel the need to explain the effectiveness of this sacrifice, meaning it's simply recognized or implied that this works. Okay, you know. So if you're an Israelite reading this passage, you don't need it explained to you why Israel lost this battle. It's because everyone knows. We all know that this ritual works, that this is effective, but it is nonetheless detestable and abhorrent. But the question is, if it's recognized as effective, could that sort of suggest that there was a time when this was done by Israelites themselves? And so we're going to look into that. So we'll begin with Ezekiel, a famous priest and exilic prophet. So he was part of um, the segment of Israel that was taken into exile. And there's a very curious and mysterious passage of his in the Old Testament. Ezekiel 20, verses 25 through 26, quote, "So I, Yahweh, gave them, the Israelites, other statutes that were not good and laws through which they could not live. I defiled them through their gifts, the sacrifice of every firstborn, that I might fill them with horror so that they would know that I am the Lord." Now, you might wonder, what is this referring to? I mean, it's speaking of sacrifice of every firstborn, but where does God Where does Yahweh give the Israelites a command to sacrifice every firstborn? Well, it's possible that this is found in Exodus 22, verses 29 through 30. Quote, "Do not hold back offerings from your granaries or your vats. You must give me, Yahweh, the firstborn of your sons. Do the same with your cattle and your sheep. Let them stay with their mothers for 7 days, but give them to me on the eighth day." Now, people will argue, well, it says, yes, give me, Yahweh, your firstborn sons, but this is not referring to sacrifice. This is referring to a metaphorical offering when a child, or specifically a son, is circumcised. Okay. Obviously, yes. All right. The reason why this passage survives, like many of these controversial passages survives, is because they can be reinterpreted in a different way, which is why they survive redactions. But arguably, this harkens to a more archaic and disturbing practice where the giving of the firstborn sons was, as Ezekiel alludes to, as a sacrifice of every firstborn that Yahweh had commanded. Okay, now this word here, which is translated as sacrifice in the New International Version, is the word in Hebrew beha'avir, beha'avir, or he'avir, which literally translates to pass through, to have passed through. Okay, so recall that when we refer to the Molech offering, which was translated as a deity Moloch, it refers to the passing through fire. Okay, so this is understood as a sacrifice of the firstborn. And Ezekiel is saying, yeah, Yahweh commanded this. Okay, Yahweh ordered the sacrifice of the firstborn. But, this was intentional. Okay, he intentionally gave us these bad laws, these laws that really brought death upon us, so that we may, in this paradoxical way, be filled with awe, be filled with horror, and recognize Yahweh as the Lord. Okay, very interesting passage. Now, what we'll see is that Ezekiel had a contemporary, another prophet named Jeremiah. Now, whereas Ezekiel was actually cast into exile, Jeremiah was not. He remained in Judah. And Jeremiah also addresses the sacrifice of neonates and adolescents. Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 31. They, quote, they, the Israelites, have built the high places of Topheth in the valley of Ben Hinam to burn their sons and daughters in the fire, something I did not command, nor did it even enter my mind, unquote. Okay. So this is saying pretty much the exact opposite of what Ezekiel said. Yeah, the Israelites built these altars to burn their sons and daughters, but look, this is not something I, Yahweh, did, nor did I command this. And when we look at these locations, so the Valley of Ben Hinnom, the Valley of Ben Hinnom in the New Testament is also mentioned as Gehenna, where Jesus says the reprobates, the completely corrupt souls will be thrown there in fire. Okay, in fire. It's actually a symbolic, in the New Testament times, it's a symbol of hell itself. Okay, so this valley of Hinnom, where these sacrifices would occur, would be regarded as cursed, an abominable place where they would throw trash and whatnot to be burned. And the location of Topheth, which you see here. Apparently, there's some cemeteries or whatnot there. Topheth is most probably derived from the word tephet, which means fire altar. Fire altar. So Jeremiah is identifying that in this location, the Topheth, you have this fire altar in the valley of Ben Hinam where these sacrifices would occur, and it would involve fire. Okay, fire. But again, he's arguing that this has nothing to do with Yahweh. Yahweh is completely separated from this. And we see this again, Jeremiah 19, verse 4 through 5. Quote, "For they, the Israelites, have forsaken me," that is Yahweh. "The Israelites have forsaken Yahweh and made this a place of foreign gods. They have burned incense into the gods that neither they nor their ancestors nor the kings of Judah ever knew. And they have filled this place with the blood of the innocent. They have built the high places of Baal to burn their children in the fire as offerings to Baal. Something I did not command or mention, nor did it enter my mind." So again, yes, the Israelites did this. They were burning their children. But this had nothing to do with Yahweh. This is, they were seduced by the Baal cult. This is a foreign cult. And again, you find this bizarre double emphasis, this denial. Something I did not mention or command, nor did it even enter my mind. Every time there's a mention of child sacrifice, there is this double emphasis, this double denial that occurs. And we see it again in Jeremiah 32, verse 35. Quote, "They, the Israelites, built high places for Baal in the valley of Ben Hinnom to sacrifice their sons and daughters to Moloch, though I never commanded, nor did it enter my mind, that they should do such a detestable thing and so make Judah sin." Okay, now from what I've read from textual scholars, this kind of formula here, this double denial, though I never commanded, nor did it enter my mind, is very unusual. Okay, it is a powerful emphasis on denying that Yahweh had anything to do with these detestable human sacrifices. But it raises the question, is the author having to do this because there were Israelites who believed that there were commands to sacrifice their firstborn, their daughters, and whatnot? Okay, sort of like what Ezekiel alluded to. Okay, that there were such commandments, and could it be that the double denial is almost like, the old saying, "She doth protest too much," right? No, no, this is not me. I had nothing to do with this. I'm Yahweh. This is the benevolent God. It's the evil foreign gods, Baal and Moloch, that have something to do with this. Okay. So I think if you analyze the evidence that we have textually, I can understand why historians and academics do argue that in the ancient religion of Israel, there was a practice that involved the human sacrifice of adolescents and neonates. And as you can tell, I've been avoiding a certain phraseology for that human sacrifice, and I think you'll understand it's for obvious reasons. But for my purpose, right, if this is in fact a reality, and I'm meditating on how this affects our understanding of the evolution of religion, what we see is that even in a particular religion, you can have incredible fluxes and changes, really radical and revolutionary alterations in praxis and theology in the same religion. And what this has to question are certain methodologies and epistemologies of religious thinking. Like you find many times among fundamentalists, especially in Protestantism and even like Salafi Islam, that seek to find their truth in the original form of the religion. Okay, so like for Protestants, it's dispelling so-called accretions of Catholicism and trying to return back to some kind of original, because the original is understood to be pure and true. Old is gold, as they say. But what do you do when this is the original? What if the original includes a detestable and abhorrent practice as human sacrifice? Could any Christian, could any Jew, could any Muslim possibly say that this is what should be restored? I find that hard to believe. And so, what we have to realize is that so called innovations, right, can be superior and would have to be understood as some kind of inspiration to further progress the religious thinking and understanding. That we should not fear necessarily innovation, that innovation at times is necessary. And we also have to consider that there's a humbling effect if I, as a Catholic, have to recognize that originally Yahweh was identified as a God that received and ordained human sacrifice of the firstborn. Well, that might not be something that we believe now, but that's at the origins. So we cannot necessarily despise and look down on other religions. There might be something that I find abhorrent in another religion, but yet this is at the foundation of my own religion. So there's a certain humility that this has to inspire in us, and also recognize the evolutionary nature that we find in religiosity and the history of religious ideas, so that we may always move onwards and upwards, closer to the reality that God is unveiling and unfolding in the churning of time.